So the journey for them to purchase, right, is not a single journey, and it's also not linear. They'll be going from platform to platform, right, from digital world to the physical world, back to the digital world, right? And you don't know where they're going to buy, right? They might be buying in the digital world, they might be buying in the physical world. Do the boring things first and do them well, right? Because the big shiny stars that you have over there are not the ones that will give you sort of that long-term advantage. Doing the boring things right? And the fundamental things are the ones which are more important. Marketplaces still play a large dominant role. And now with the emergence of social commerce, right, live commerce, it has undergone its own shift, right? So we're seeing sort of TikTok Shop emerge as a very prominent player in the market.
Well, Raman, thank you. Thank you very much for being here. It's great to have you. We spoke about doing this a few months ago over coffee on East Coast. So I'm glad that we finally managed to get the calendars lined up. So you're the COO of Leap Commerce. It's a full-service e-commerce enabler that was born out of Luxasia, which is one of the leading distributors of luxury beauty fashion brands in Asia. Before starting the conversations, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your role and about Leap and Luxasia.
Well, thanks, Charles, for having me. Very excited about this particular podcast and this conversation. I think it's been a couple of months in the making, but very glad to be finally over here. So I'm Raman. As you mentioned, I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Leap Commerce. Leap Commerce is a e-commerce enabler incubated and born within Luxasia, and then we sort of carved it out as a separate entity to focus on digital commerce, because digital commerce in itself deserved sort of a special focus. Mm-hmm. Now, Luxasia is a 40-year-old setup, which was established by our founder, Patrick, back in the days to bring in brands into Asia, incubate them and grow them. It's been a very successful business, and till say about 10 years ago, it was very, very successful in the offline space, which means that department stores, freestanding stores, distribution to chain stores was the predominant focus. And 10 years ago, Patrick, who was also very visionary at that point of time, wanted and saw the world changing, saw that digital is becoming a large part of the focus for consumers as well. And he wanted to set up a vertical which was focused on digital commerce. At that point of time, it was solely e-commerce. So Lazada was setting up shop over here in the region, then Shopee came, and then all the others. So he wanted us to be present on those platforms, and we went out into the market and we looked at sort of players who could help us do that, and we couldn't find somebody who could do the right justice to give the TLC to the brands that we have, because the brands that we were working with at that point of time were predominantly luxury, prestige brands in the beauty space. So brand is of utmost importance to them. So to ensure that we do the right treatment for those brands, we wanted to get onto the platforms in the right manner. And for that, when we started looking for players, we couldn't find the right players. So we decided to incubate that within Luxasia itself. So that was the birth of Luxasia e-commerce. And me and my co-founder over there at that point of time, Manvi, along with Shataki, we sort of set this up as the entity that will take the brands onto the marketplaces, set up .coms, and eventually we also started doing social commerce. So that's how Leap Commerce came into existence. Then came COVID. The world went topsy-turvy. You couldn't go out into the stores to buy stuff. So e-commerce was the only way that consumers could get their products. So we had to grow up many decades within that 1 year itself. It was a crazy time. I remember that we had warehouses which were not set up for the capacity that came that way. We had 10 times more capacity, 10 times more demand than the capacity that we had set up, right? And those were fun times.
So what's the scale today of operations for Leap Commerce? How many markets, how many brands?
So we're present in 8 markets across the region, and we're expanding into Australia and India as we speak. So the 8 markets are the Southeast Asian 6 core markets: Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, Thailand. We've got a cross-border hub in Hong Kong, and we're also present in Taiwan. So these 8 markets. We're setting up Australia as we speak. So we'll be going live with our first brand in the next couple of weeks. And we're also in conversations with a few brands in India.
What does it look like today versus 8-10 years ago when you spin out Leap Commerce in terms of operation? You as the COO, you've been here since the beginning. What's the difference today in terms of operations, the way things are run in the company, and how you operate across all of these countries?
Yeah, no, good question. I think I'll answer that in 2 parts, right? The world has changed dramatically over the last 10 years, right? Especially in this particular region where e-commerce in specific has matured and has gone through multiple iterations, right? So the e-commerce that we know of 10 years ago is not the same sort of digital commerce that we know of as of today. And that's the beauty of being in this space, because every year it's a new sort of challenge that we're dealing with. We started off with sort of the marketplaces in this region when Lazada and Shopee came into existence, their particular setup. I remember the days when we were still operating off Excel, right? And all order files used to come on Excel. We used to sort of populate tons of Excel. Then we sort of had pipelines built, APIs built, and we're talking about live shopping now. We're talking about agentic commerce right now. So it's gone through its evolution, right? And transformation, which is tremendous. I think this market in Southeast Asia is not a single market, and we'll touch upon that in the conversation going forward. But it's also a market where marketplaces are dominant, because to discover the consumers, you need sort of a platform, and that platform was provided by the marketplaces. Unlike commerce in the West, which is part marketplaces thanks to Amazon, but also a strong brand presence independently, where you've got sort of brand.coms reaching out to the consumers. Over here, I think marketplaces still play a large dominant role. And now with the emergence of social commerce, right, live commerce, it has undergone its own shift, right? So we're seeing sort of TikTok Shop emerge as a very prominent player in the market, and content consumption, social media presence for consumers in Southeast Asia is amongst the highest in the world, right? And it lends itself naturally to the fact that then consumers will buy off those particular platforms as well. And then .coms, we're seeing large established brands in this particular region who value sort of owning customer relationships, also consumer data. They establishing their own presence over here. But again, it's difficult because it's not a contiguous 600 million people market, right? It's 6, 8, 10 different markets with their own regulations, and then setting it up in each of these markets actually is subscale. That's where the power of the platforms come into the picture.
You have quite when we were speaking before this conversation, you have quite a wide range of responsibilities beyond I would say the traditional COO role. You also own ops, so ops, of course, commercials, data, strategy. Is it a consequence of how the market is fragmented and like a requirement that actually Leap has when their senior leader, COO, has to have this kind of range of responsibilities because the market moves so much, because it's so fragmented and complex, as you were saying? Thailand is very different from Philippines, from Indonesia, etc.
Right. Yeah, so COO traditionally is either chief operations officer or chief operating officer, right? So I consider myself more in the chief operating officer light, where when you think about operations, you think warehouse and logistics, right? Yes. And solely focused on that. I believe we're in a space where there are problems to be fixed. And that's the reason why we exist as a company, that you don't have a seamless solution available, and you need to make sure that wherever there's a problem, be that on the operation side, be that on the data side, be that on the technology side, on the commercial side, we get in over there and try to fix that particular problem, right? So, and that's the way that Leap has evolved. We still consider ourselves sort of to be a startup, right? To be in that particular mold where we're focusing on solving problems for brands and delivering value to consumers. We continue to operate like somebody who's young, nimble, right? And given the way that the market has been evolving, to your point, that it's a complex market, it's a fragmented market, and it's an ever-evolving, changing market, right? So we need to sort of adapt ourselves to be able to serve that. So my role is essentially any problems that we have within the organization, we try and see how we solve them the best and remove barriers and friction from that particular space.
Such an evolving landscape, and as you say, changing consumer behaviors, changing requirements means making decisions. Where does the ownership of this decision lie between you as enabler or Luxasia distributor and the brands? How do you collaborate with all these? I mean, it's big names that you work with, right? So yeah, what's the balance? How do you collaborate with them?
That's a good question, and sort of the right question to ask is sort of within sort of a brand, the enabler, the marketplace, right? What role does each of them play within that, and is it siloed, right? Is it that I am sort of the brand owner, I decide the strategy, I am the enabler, you execute that particular strategy, and the marketplace is where it gets executed on? I think commerce cuts through all these particular layers, right? And each of them has its own role to play, right? Therefore, I think the question always is what is right from a brand's perspective to deliver value to the consumers, right? And which means that brands usually define what their strategy is, what the guardrails are. Our role is to sort of make sure that we can execute within those particular guardrails, set up sort of commercial activations, set up tactical mechanics, set up the right promotions and campaigns within those particular guardrails. Now, is there a time where there's friction, right? Where sort of there are overlapping opinions? Always, right? So you'll always have that. And that's where we come into the picture, where we sort of collaborate with the brands, put our point of view, they have their own point of view over there, right? And we come to sort of a mutual consensus. I think our approach has always been to do right by the brand, right? And ensure that we deliver the right long-term value to the brand and the consumers. Because how the marketplaces have evolved over here, as have they in other parts of the world, is that to create a large marketplace of consumers, it has been fronted by sort of consumer discounts, right? And long-term value creation becomes the challenge, right? If your sole proposition is discounted play. So that's something that we've had to straddle the balance between. But we are getting more adept at that, and brands are also maturing enough to see what is the right play to make.
Do your interlocutors or the ownership change depending on the type of brands, the size of the brand, or the industry they're in? So basically, I feel like there's this ongoing debate. I mean, keeps on happening with every brand we meet. Where does the ownership of e-commerce, digital commerce lie? Is it marketing? Is it ops? Is it sales? So do you see the same thing? Do you have like different interlocutors and hence maybe sometimes different understanding and requirements? You were talking about can be a flush channel for the e-commerce was perceived as that in the past. Is it still an image that remains, or is it really an image only maybe with marketing people versus, I don't know, other functions?
I think different functions, the way that they've been set up, have their own perspective, right? And have their own objectives to fulfill within the ecosystem of the company, right? It has evolved in a way that digital commerce is essentially sort of a convergence of different functions, right? Which includes supply chain ops, you've got sort of marketing, you've got sales, right? That each of them with their own sort of objectives which are overlapping, right? At some point of time, but also contradicting at some point of time, right? To manage, right? Now, traditionally, e-commerce was and has been seen sort of as a channel where consumers make impulse purchases, but also sort of as a channel like you mentioned was sort of prone to deeper discounts, right, and flushing out of inventory. I think that has evolved and changed rapidly, right, over the last 8-10 years that I've been over here at Leap. I think the consumer journey is no longer linear, right? Consumers do not shop at a particular moment, right? They go to a store, they see a product, they like the product. They go online, they click a picture of that product now, go to a chat GPT or go to sort of a Claude and ask about that product. Or they'll do a Google search about it. If it's an electronics product, they'll read a review about it on YouTube or they'll see Reddit and sort of understand the features. Then they'll go to a marketplace, right? And then they'll sort of see what are the available options to buy that. They'll also go to the brand.com and see, is there a particular loyalty program that I can get onto if I sort of buy it from the brand directly, right? Then they'll go back to the store, right? And then they'll sort of have a conversation with the sales agent over there, right? In the meantime, they'll be having a conversation with their spouse and their children and their friends about the same product, right? So the journey for them to purchase, right, is not a single journey. And it's also not linear. They'll be going from platform to platform, right? From digital world to the physical world, back to the digital world, right? And you don't know where they're going to buy, right? They might be buying in the digital world. They might be buying in the physical world. And they'll be influenced at different point of time, right? And you also have social media, right? So where you'll also have influencers and KOLs, right? And power sellers also wanting to sell to them, right? I think the objective for a brand in this particular case, right, is to be present where the consumer is, right? And to be present at the right point of time, right, with the right mechanics available for the consumer to transact, right? And our job is to make sure that we remove out friction from any point of transaction that the consumer can potentially be at. And therefore, it's not a question of is it marketing or is it sales, right? Because both of them are serving the same objective. It's very difficult to sort of answer that question. Is social commerce, is live stream, are TikTok and is Instagram, is it marketing or is it conversion?
You were talking about how this journey is not linear, yet today Leap is online. Luxasia helps more on the retail offline side. You have obviously brands that are working with both arms of the companies. So what's your story there? How do you collaborate with Luxasia now that you are more independent in a way, so that you have still a compelling story? And because we do see that, of course, digital commerce has a huge traction and is maybe even leading in terms of the speed at which it goes around the world. But retail is still obviously extremely strong. And as you say, it is extremely important in this buying journey, wherever the intent starts and the purchase happens. So what's your view on this? How do you see the omni-channel story?
Great question. I think sort of the same direction that we've been thinking of at Luxasia and Leap, right? I think the way it's set up traditionally as sort of an offline channel and an online channel sort of lends itself to sort of how historically it emerged, right? But how it's evolved as of today is that the consumer journey is not linear, right? And at Leap and Luxasia, I think we realized that as well, right? Where Luxasia traditionally sort of managing the offline channels, Leap now managing the online channels, we're still one team, right? Where we sort of work with, and we still sit in the same office, right? We still work with managers as one P&L and not two separate P&Ls over there, right? So if it's a brand P&L, it's a brand P&L, right? It doesn't matter whether it's online or offline. Right? I think the other thing of note is that we've consolidated functions where there's a digital touch point under Leap, right? Which means that consumer CRM, right, as a function where sort of you've got a digital touch point, right, in the physical world, right, where you're collecting consumer data, where you're reaching out to the consumer, right, and sort of activating journeys with the consumer as well, both in the physical world and in the digital world. That is managed by Leap as a digital team, so that we bridge across both the physical and the digital aspects.
We were talking about how fragmented APAC or Asia as a whole is. What do brands consistently maybe get wrong about this region when you accompany them, when you onboard new brands that want to expand? Because it is an Eldorado in a way. There is a lot of demand. Brands scale very fast here. But what do they get wrong usually?
I think we've had a lot of conversations where a brand comes in, right, and whether it's an American brand, European brands, Japanese, Korean brands, now a lot more Chinese and even Indian brands looking at Southeast Asia, right? I think the first thing fundamentally that they see is a population pool of 600 million people, right, across the region, and they see Southeast Asia, right, as a block. I think that in itself is fundamentally what they're getting wrong. We are not a homogeneous 600 people block. We are not one region, right? We are Singapore and Malaysia and Indonesia and Philippines and Vietnam and Thailand, right? Along with sort of Brunei and all the other countries over here in this particular region. Each country has its own language, right? Each country has its own culture. Each country has its own sort of preferences to how they shop, right? Each country has its own religion, and religion sort of also lends itself to the type of products that you have, but also the regulatory environment. Halal certification in Malaysia and in Indonesia is not a good to have, right? It is a must have, right, in certain categories, right? And that is something that if you are sitting from the outside, you will not know that particular nuance to. So you need to speak to the right consumer. You need to sort of have the right product offering to the consumer. What will work in Malaysia will not work in Indonesia, or may not work in Indonesia, right? The kind of influences that you have in Indonesia will not be the same one in Philippines and in Vietnam, right? Also, each market's a capacity to buy is also very, very different, right? Because the GDP per capita for each of these countries is also at a different stage of evolution. They've gone through a historical process that has been different, and they lend themselves to different preferences because of that. So I think it's unwise for companies to assume that it's a single marketplace that they're dealing with. It's at least 6 different marketplaces with 6 different regulators, 6 different consumers that they need to deal with, right? And that's the reason why sort of the marketplaces, how they've set themselves up, have also been country by country. So each country team is sort of responsible for running this organization. A Shopee and a Lazada is not a Shopee and a Lazada. They are Shopee Singapore, Shopee Malaysia, Shopee Indonesia, Shopee Philippines, Shopee Thailand, Shopee Vietnam, all different countries.
So you were talking a bit about the religion part, which also has an impact on the calendar of sales day throughout the year. Sales day is a big topic in Southeast Asia. So the 9/9, 10/10, 11/11, and the Ramadan sales, all these kind of things. What does it take to win at this sales period in Southeast Asia?
No, good question. I think when I started off, and I go back to your question, right, that you asked, right, what has evolved in the ecosystem over here, right? When we started off 10 years ago, I think the double-digit trend, the 11/11, which started off by Alibaba in China, right, was sort of starting and emerging in Southeast Asia, right? And the concentration that we had on the double digits, and specifically 11/11, used to at times be 50, 70, even 100x of your BAU run rate, right? Which meant that you got capacity crunched into a time window where your warehouses need to fulfill that particular capacity, right? And sort of churn out parcels, right? Which puts inordinate amount of stress on the system, both on a commercial perspective, right? Because you don't want to miss out on the traffic that you assume that is going to come in at that window, right? So there's opportunity cost that you have, right? but also the pressure on sort of warehousing logistics to fulfill that particular demand, right, and get the parcels out as quickly as possible. I think with the maturity of the market now, those peaks have been spread out, right? So you don't just have a 11-11, you have a 12-12, you have a 9-9, you have a 10-10, you have a 6-6, you've got a double digit every sort of almost every month, right? Within a month, you've got sort of a double digit campaign, you've got a payday campaign, you've got a mid-month campaign, you've got a special sort of brand campaign that might be running between these, you've got a category day that might be running as well, right? I think what that has trained consumers, right, in a way is that there is always going to be a campaign around the corner, right? And therefore, is there any one particular right day to buy? No, right? So you could still buy across many different occasions and many sort of different campaign periods, KCPs as they call them. But I think consumers are also now the brands that are working with sort of consumers are also getting to a stage where they also want to detox the consumers of discounts, right? And what value can they give to them beyond sort of discounts is what the next stage of evolution is coming to.
The landscape has quite evolved over the past few years. So when 2015, I would say to 2020, a lot of fragmentation. If you wanted to cover maybe 60% of the market in Indonesia, you needed to be on 4 or 5 marketplaces.
Yeah.
Feels like it consolidated.
Yeah.
With some leaders, the Lazada, Shopee. We have now a TikTok shop that's extremely fast, took a big place here. How do you see the landscape evolving by country, I would say, or what are the countries that you think are worth having a closer look or focusing on maybe a bit more for certain brands?
Yeah, I think each country in this region has its own sort of perspective on how they look at commerce, right? And also how commerce has evolved within each of these particular geographies as well, right? So for us, sort of we're across all countries, so each of them is important to us, right? Singapore is the smallest, right? But it is also sort of the highest propensity to buy, right? In terms of high value goods, the highest average order value. Consumers are extremely busy over here, which means that you do not have, and infrastructure is great, right? Which means that you do not have commutes which are more than, on an average, 30 to 40 minutes long, right? Which means that the amount of consumers on, say, a TikTok is generally lower as compared to other markets where you have got longer commutes, right? And people are sort of browsing on their apps while they're on their way to commutes, right? So in Indonesia, Vietnam, or Malaysia, or even the Philippines, right, people tend to spend more time on sort of apps where you got content consumption and shopping happening at the same time, right? Well, which is not the case over here in Singapore, right? So given that particular perspective, right, TikTok is still emerging out in this particular region. Lazada serves a different purpose, right? Shopee serves a different purpose, right? Broadly in the ecosystem, I think Shopee has emerged as a front runner across all markets, right? Especially so in Indonesia, in Vietnam, where they're sort of very dominant. In other markets, I think they're also the dominant player, right? But depends upon the scale in each of the markets, right? Lazada has grew very, very strongly, right? But as of today, they're focusing on sort of building a loyal customer base, sort of loyal to brands and focusing on sort of the brand sort of narrative that they have. Each has its own individual strengths. Each has its own individual plays, right? Indonesia is the largest market, so obviously warrants a lot of attention, right? Vietnam is a very social commerce market, right? And the kind of sort of social commerce that we see in Vietnam, we don't see anywhere else in sort of Southeast Asia. So each market is slightly different, each with its own nuance. And I think it's very important to sort of mold yourself as a commerce player to each market and the consumer over there.
I want to get into AI now.
Sure.
Um,
Everybody's favorite topic nowadays, right? So,
but particularly yours. You recently published 2 pieces of content
Right.
About AI. One is a novel, like a near future story.
Yeah.
And the other one is more of a satirical essay on AI. I want to start with this one, this article. So, if I got it right, you basically argue that the most important upgrade needed in AI right now is actually rest, for its users.
Right.
People building with AI have basically started living like the models that they're using.
Yeah.
So they maximize output, they minimize downtime, and they treat rest as a competitor to the usage of AI. So you call it token maxing your own life.
Yeah.
The same way as we talk about token maxing with AI. There's obviously a lot of irony in this essay because it came from a simple question asked by your daughter.
Yeah.
Does AI help you? And you ended up with a 7 pages long essay about, is it helping me? What is it? So what does it say about the world we live in? What does it say about the approach we have to AI?
Yeah. No, and you can get me into a rabbit hole on this particular topic, right? But I think we live in a world where AI is a reality, right? And I think it's a wonderful time to be alive, right? Because we've seen many sort of revolutions in our lifetimes as well, right? I started off sort of everything was analog, right? We were writing on paper, reading books, right? Then PCs emerged, right? And everybody had access to sort of personal computers. And then the age of the internet came. We've gone through a financial crisis as well. So within this lifetime and the short lifespan that I've lived, we've seen many revolutions. But I think we're at the cusp of something which could be sort of as revolutionary as the industrial revolution, if not more, right? I think the way that AI has emerged as of today, right? It's very important to understand what AI is, right? And especially what these large language models are. Large language models are prediction machines, right? They've taken the entire history of the world, right? Available in public domains or not in public domains, right? Crunched through all of them, right? And done sophisticated pattern matching, right? Which means that I can predict what the next token will be based upon whatever context and whatever data is available, right? And that is sort of native to how we as humans behave, right? Because we're language beings, right? We sort of thrive and interact based upon sort of the language. This conversation that we're having is essentially a language conversation. And that's what makes it human, right? And the ability for an inanimate object to be sort of spitting out something that you can understand as language, right? Is the wow moment, right? And is what sort of fascinates everybody, right? And it making sense, and even more sense than what you are making, is where sort of the world, sort of minds were sort of blown that, okay, this is the real revolution. But what that has led to is sort of a lot of people now finding this tool, right, where they can amplify sort of what they can do, right, with the help of AI, right, and sort of going great lengths to sort of start building and start doing certain things that they wouldn't have imagined a few years ago, right? I think that's a great thing, right? Where everybody now has the power to build, create, and have the tools available with them at their disposal to sort of build. But what that has led to is a race, especially predicated by large sort of tech companies, to consume tokens, and token consumption then becomes sort of a badge of honor.
Yeah.
That I'm consuming 1 million tokens a day, I'm consuming 3 million sort of tokens a day, right? And that, I think, is sort of counterproductive in certain cases where you're consuming tokens for the sake of consuming tokens, right? And that's what I've seen in a lot of cases where I speak to friends and they're like, oh, we're building great things with AI. Okay, what are you building? We're building sort of our second brain. And because our second brain was not enough, we're building a third brain, right? And what will we do with that third brain? Okay, let's build it first and then figure out what we'll do with that particular brain. I think we've gotten to a stage where people, and I'm talking about a small sliver of people. Yes, I know that a lot of people don't care about AI that much, but some of the folks that I know are going down into rabbit holes where sort of they're token maxing, right? And they're token maxing their own lives. They're automating everything in their own lives. And I think, I don't know how that will emerge. The true cost of AI is something that we haven't learned, right? And it will still come upon us, right? In a commerce sort of perspective, right? I'd also want to put it into context. We've come to a stage where people are now vibe coding applications, right? And the ability for you to create an application, right, is so easy that you forget that the front end or the vibe coded application is just part of the entire sort of requirement for you to run, deploy, the entire infrastructure layer that needs to be set up, the entire authentication layer that needs to be set up, the database layer, right? And are the databases structured in a way that they can sort of lend themselves to AI native applications? All the hard part is what nobody sees, right? It is sort of the easy part where you're sort of getting outputs in the form of apps, right, which can be used readily. That is great, but that is just sort of part of the work. There's also an invisible part, which is a lot more important. I give the example of, say, I'm a coffee nerd, as they call them. So I give the example of a coffee analog, right? Everybody was used to instant coffee and just drinking their own coffee, right? We're now living in a world where sort of AI has effectively given you a grinder to grind your beans, right? And an espresso machines to sort of make your espresso shot at home, right? And all of a sudden, everybody thinks that they're a barista and can run a cafe. But creating a coffee at home is very different from running a cafe. Running a cafe means thinking about sort of the seating and the crockery and sort of the infrastructure behind it and where I'll source my beans and the regulations and sort of the food certifications. And do I get this blend or do I get that blend? Do I add certain sort of meals to certain things to my menu? It is not the same thing. And that's the same analog to people using AI to vibe code an app for an audience of one versus creating that same app for the entire world.
Which is sometimes a debate also. Over the weekend, I spent hours vibe coding a small tool like a new Calendly or whatever that actually would have costed me less to just buy Calendly and use the tool, right?
No, absolutely. I think there's a thrill in building.
Yes.
Right? And that's what everybody who is utilizing AI for that is sort of seeking. And it empowers you back to the days when a lot of people were sort of in their minds builders, right? And they wanted to become certain things in life. And life had its own sort of way and they drifted on to other directions. Now AI gives you that ability to build again, right? But whether that build is scalable or not, right, still depends upon a lot of factors. Again, don't get me wrong. I think AI is the most revolutionary technology that has sort of come in our lifetime, then it will be unlocking sort of a lot of opportunities and moments for us. But the way that things are sort of progressing right now will require a bit of titration, will require a bit of moderation, right? And we will still need to realize, A, the cost, right? How much does it really cost to consume those particular tokens? And what is the real ROI? Unless we get sort of this balance right, how we scale AI is always going to be a question.
You were talking about coffee. In your novel, you also there's also the story around the coffee machine. So it's a world where, of course, there's AI, but it has removed all friction in the city. So basically, disagreeing with the recommendation you get from AI feels, I don't know, childish or a bit weird because it's for your own good. So the character, the hero of your story wants to get a coffee. Yeah. The coffee machine tells him, no, you're caffeinated enough, right. You're energized enough. So he needs to argue with the coffee machine.
Yes.
That knows what's best for him, overrides the system, so he can still do it. But then ultimately the coffee machine kind of grades him or understands him better.
Right.
If I draw a parallel with e-commerce,
yeah,
agentic commerce, predictive inventory, all these kind of things.
Yeah.
When does it get like the coffee machine in your story? When does e-commerce starts to be like this and decide for us, or the recommendation goes maybe a bit too far and no, I want a coffee.
Yeah.
You're telling me I don't need coffee, but I want a coffee.
Yeah, great. Excellent point over there. I think every point of friction that you remove is a point of consent that you've taken out, right? I think within the entire framework, I think the idea is to remove out points of friction, right, which are inconsequential, right, to your decision making, right, and are overheads, but keep the user with the ability to still consent or still decide at certain points where it sort of makes sense for them, right? And it's a bit difficult for sort of you to decide that whether an auto suggest, right, for a particular item is the right way to do it, or actually adding a blazer, right, of tan color into my basket and just sort of prompting them to check out is the right way. I think we'll get to a stage where sort of we'll figure out, or consumers will figure out, what is the right level of friction that they want in the system and where do they really want to consent and they don't want to consent. Where I see the world going is that we'll make things worse before we make things better, right? So we'll get to a stage where you'll have sort of apps buying for you and deciding that this is the right cut of suit that you want and this can go with only this shirt, right? But it will swing back, right? Where consumers will still want a control, right? And I don't like a brown shirt, right? I want a white shirt to go along with this, and that's where those controls will come back, right? I think that's the way the world always operates, right? It goes to extremes before we pull it back.
Okay, so just to finish, Raman, a few rapid questions.
Sure.
At Leap, what's your North Star metric?
I think our North Star is profitability, but profitability is not a goal, is not a metric, right? So I think metric that we usually strive for, both for ourselves and for our brand, is contribution margin, right? So product contribution margin, and that's where we sort of make sure that we're hitting the right contribution margin, because only when you have the right contribution margins can your business sort of scale and grow.
What's a commerce trend that you'd bet on for the future?
I'd say live commerce and social commerce is today, right? Yep. So it's already here. That was a trend that I would have bet on, but as of today, I'd say agentic commerce will sort of become more and more pervasive, but I think more at the discovery side of things, right? The enablement for sort of transactions will happen. That is fine. I think the discovery side of agentic commerce is going to be where the real unlock lies.
Is there a brand outside of Leap and Luxasia's customers whose commerce strategy you kind of admire or you really follow?
Yeah, I would have said SK2, because that's a brand that we sort of work on, and despite sort of giving zero sort of discounts over here, we've been able to sort of scale the brand very, very strategically on the marketplaces. But the other that, and it's gone through a bit of controversy, but right now Lululemon sort of lends itself to the same philosophy, where they're also in a spot where they've been giving sort of lesser discounts. Now there's more competition, they're reinventing themselves, and would love to see how it emerges.
Is there one thing that you wish more people talked about in this industry?
I think more people in the commerce industry, I think overall in the commerce industry, specifically how it's grown, discounts sort of are equivalent to debt for a company, right? In the way that they set up the long-term vision. And I think that is maturing, but I think that there needs to be a lot more conversation, both from the platforms as well as from the enablers and the brands, on how to make sure that we build a long-term sustainable sort of ecosystem.
Another question, so you publish a little bit on LinkedIn. Is there someone that you recommend following, or a company that you recommend following that you take inspiration from?
I love Andrei Karpathy, right? And how he he's always a knowledge first person, right? And I love to listen to his thoughts and podcasts, and would love to see how things emerge from here. I listen to quite a few podcasts, right? And there are a lot of them on YouTube, right? But specifically around LLMs, there's one called 3 Blue, 1 Brown that I follow very, very much.
Finally, last question. What's the best piece of advice that you've ever received in your career?
The best piece of advice that so that's an interesting voice. Yeah, the best piece of advice that I ever received in my career. I think the best piece of advice that I received in my career has been around do the boring things first and do them well, right? Because the big shiny stars that you have over there are not the ones that will give you that long-term advantage. Doing the boring things right? And the fundamental things are the ones which are more important for you.
Well, thank you very much, Raman.
Thank you, Charles.
Thank you very much for your time. It was great having you here today.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.